Okay, we'll make a start. As Faye has said, if you have any questions on your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a questions box, and I'm going to ask you to use that in a moment. So just to get you used to finding it and taking part in the webinar. These things work so much better if it's more of a two-way conversation than me just talking. So if you have questions or comments, please pop them into the questions box. They can't be seen by everyone straight off, but we will be reading things out as we go through and picking up on comments and questions as we work through the webinar. So in that questions panel, and there's a picture showing you where to put it, I'd like you to answer these two questions. Where are you from? Which organization are you from? And why are you here? And I'm not talking in the big metaphysical sense of why are we here, but why have you come to this webinar? What is it that you're hoping to get out of it? Or are you just looking to fill an hour before lunch? So yeah, just put your answers into the questions box. Just give you a minute to do that. So Faye, I'm not seeing anything coming through on the questions box yet. Are you seeing things? Because just want to check that I'm not missing anything.
Hi Mark, yeah, we've had responses from Matt Vaughan and David. So Matt's from Org ProStart Training, David's from Morley College.
Great. It's really odd. I'm not actually seeing any of that in my control panel right now, but I think I've got a bug. So yeah, any thoughts on why people are here? Faye?
Yeah, so Matt's responded that making sure our mobile technologies are up to date as can be, and David said CPD.
Okay. Okay, that's great. So we're small in number today, so please chip in at any point, and Faye will relay any comments and questions to me as I'm not seeing them. So just picking up on, I love this quote because it just describes to me very, very clearly why we need to be really careful. No, sorry, why we need to include mobile devices in our learning strategies. Mobile devices, particularly in the developed world, are ubiquitous. Most people, once you're a teenager, not everyone, but most people, once you're a teenager, you have a mobile device, and through that, you have got access to the whole internet and all the people and the expertise and the knowledge that contains. So what Ray Kurzweil says here is absolutely true. Throughout the devices that we hold in our hands, that we put in our pockets, we have access to all that knowledge. Now, when I was a kid, that was science fiction. And I love that science fiction, but now it's science fact, and it's absolutely true. And if we ignore that, we are missing out a huge aspect to what we can offer in terms of learning. And so this statistic is looking at global internet traffic in 2019, in the last quarter of 2019. So more than half of internet traffic came from mobile devices. That's an astounding statistic. So if we don't include mobile devices in our strategy, we're losing potentially half the people. And I'll give you an example. I ran a global MOOC, a massive open online course, a couple of months ago. It was a course that was open for 3 months, and we had 3,500 participants from 94 countries, most of them in the developing world, and about half of the people that accessed the course accessed it on an Android device. Half of those 3,500 people, half of the hits on the course were from an Android device. So it could have been a tablet, but it was more likely a mobile phone size. We couldn't actually tell from the stats we collected. So my advice from that is that unless you are absolutely certain that people will not be using a mobile device, then you need to design for it. And by mobile device, I'm talking small screen. So tablets are getting big, but so they're almost sort of laptop size. But let's focus on the small screen devices. You need to design for those unless you're certain that people won't be using them. Now, only you know your audience. Only you know the types of devices that they're going to be using. And hopefully in your research about your users, you will have found out whether they're going to be using mobile devices or not. But if you want to be on the safe side, assume that they are, and then you'll know that you're covered. So we had a few responses to the survey that I put out before this webinar. This was the most interesting question. That so do you use a mobile device when you need to learn or find out something? Most people said, so it was it 95% of the 20 said yes, I do. One person said no, that's fine. What I didn't ask, which perhaps I should have done, is some more questions about the demographics, ages and locations and things like that. So we didn't really have any stats to segment people, but it's still interesting that people use, and you use, mobile devices to access knowledge when you need it. And that is one of the key use cases for mobile learning, is that giving support at the point of need. And I don't know about you, but whenever something comes up on television or when in a conversation and I'm thinking, well, I don't know what that means, or I'm not sure what that is, I'll look it up. I'll just go to my phone, quickly type it in and look it up. My kids do exactly the same thing. Most people I know would do exactly the same thing. And if they can't find it, then, or if I can't find it, I'll ask a question on my social networks, with a LinkedIn or whatever. But it's all done through that mobile device. My laptop's sitting there, but that's more for the work when I need to focus. A mobile device is there for when I just need something quick and easy and get to that piece of information. So, whoops. There were a number of responses to people when I asked about apps that help you to learn. You'll probably recognize most of these. Most of them are platforms which contain multiple types of content, like YouTube and Kindle, and Moodle, FutureLearn, things like that. Some of them are more at the formal end, and so Moodle and FutureLearn are more the sort of courses that are run by institutions. Some of them are more at the informal end, so YouTube and what else have we got? The Khan Academy. They're for when you, well, no, not the Khan Academy. Business Balls, good example. They contain content where you want to go and find something quickly. So, but these are all apps that you can use on your mobile device. I find the most used app for me is Google, because that's my access point to the rest of the world's knowledge. But from there, that then takes me to YouTube, maybe to my Kindle, maybe to what else have we got here? Yeah, maybe to sites like Business Balls. I tend to use a lot of software development, product management websites that give me lots of information, but Google is my access point to those. So I just want to focus a bit on what mobile learning is good for. Then we'll look at some examples of some good and bad mobile learning, and then we'll look at what you shouldn't do with mobile learning. So I've talked about it, access to knowledge. Mobile learning is brilliant as a reference guide or when you need to refer to something. It's also brilliant for collecting or gathering news and ideas. My morning routine is generally I go on the BBC News app while I'm eating my breakfast. I get my daily dose of news. Maybe in the evening I'll go on Feedly, which is my list of blogs and other websites that feed into that with news and ideas from people that I trust. Those things just all work really well on a mobile app. It's really good for communication. I mentioned LinkedIn earlier. A lot of people use Twitter. Zoom works brilliantly on mobile devices. All those webinar and virtual meetings systems, they all have a mobile app. And quite often these days when I'm on a Zoom call with people or a video call with people, I'm not seeing their whole face as you would from a laptop camera. I'm seeing the vertical picture that you get from a mobile device. They've got their mobile device sitting there, and that's the thing that they're accessing for the meeting, but they might have their laptop or their PC over to the side of them, which they're working on while they're talking to me in the meeting. And mobile learning is fantastic for how-tos, particularly when it's done as video. So you go to YouTube, and I do a fair bit of sort of bike repair stuff. I'm very much an amateur. I'm learning massively about how to keep my bike maintained, my push bike. And every time I need to do something, if it's not something I've done before, I will go to YouTube and I'll look up how do I change a brake cable, adjust a gear cable, tweak the spokes, whatever. And there are videos there from dozens of people who are experts in their field who can tell me how to do that and show me very clearly how to make it work. So if you're in a how-to, a skills-based sort of environment, then video design for mobile, it works brilliantly. And it's also really good when you've got that spaced repetition idea, so that when you've got, rather than giving someone a piece of learning and you just give it to them once and then they forget it 10 minutes later, spaced repetition is the technique where you keep coming back to it, and you ask them the same question over and over a few times over a period of days and weeks. And that gets them, makes them remember. It's Ebbinghaus was the person that discovered the whole forgetting curve, and then put forward this concept of spaced repetition. And one of the best examples I know of that is Duolingo. If you're learning a language and you're just starting out in a language, Duolingo is fantastic because it uses this spaced repetition concept to keep bringing you back to vocabulary, to ideas, to help you remember them. And Duolingo is just designed fantastically for mobile devices. And finally, it's really good for offline access. So this global MOOC that I was telling you about, a lot of people that were using it live in low bandwidth areas. So they'd go to a cyber cafe, they'd download the content, they'd work through the content, do the quizzes, come back to the cyber cafe, synchronize, and it's all pushed back into the system. So if you've got content that needs to be used while it's offline, that's where a mobile approach works really well. So some thoughts about good mobile design, and I'm going to give you some of these sort of principles, and then I'll show you some examples. And the picture that you're seeing there is of a book that was created by a company called Basecamp, and it's all about how to design good products. And it's don't worry about the content. This is more an example of good mobile design. So one of the absolute key thing for when you're designing content to be used on a mobile device, and I'm speaking about web content, the sort of thing that you would see in a browser, it needs to be responsive. And what that means is that the content changes shape depending on the size of the screen. So I'll show you the shape up one in a moment in a live example. But what you're seeing here is at the top of the screen, you've got a shape up button that drops down the menu. If you were seeing that when you see it in a moment, when you see it on the full screen version, that button isn't. No, it is there, but there's a whole load of other content around it that has disappeared for the mobile version. So it's all about making sure that your content reflows so it works well on a mobile device. It needs to be uncluttered. So the more things you try and stick on the screen, the more difficult it is for people using small screens to use it. So you'll see that if you're using an app that has a desktop equivalent, let's say the Microsoft Word app, desktop version has lots of buttons all over the place. The app version has very few buttons, and they try and keep it as uncluttered as possible. This concept of a strong visual hierarchy is just generally good design. It's not mobile design, it's good design. And it means it takes you through, leads your eye to the things that are important. So you can see here, we've got the shape up button very prominently at the top. That shows that's the main title for the whole thing. And then you've got your introduction, and then your growing pains, which is sort of the next level down. And the introduction is bigger, so showing you that it's more important. People react and in usability studies to text size, to boldness, to color, things like that. So it's really, really important to get that strong visual hierarchy working on the screen, so people know what's important to use. It's important, not so much in the UK and US, but maybe in other countries. Well, obviously, there are other countries with good mobile connections, with low-cost mobile connections or high income, so they can afford it. But in many countries, that's not the case. So I spend a lot of time in France, and mobile connections there, mobile data is very expensive compared to the UK. So I like websites that are low bandwidth. So, for example, they cut out content that isn't needed when it's coming to a mobile device. There's this concept in mobile development called mobile first, where you start with the content that you need on the mobile device, and then you progressively add to that content for large screens. And what that means then is that the mobile device only gets the minimum content, so doesn't use up all its bandwidth. But on a desktop machine, maybe with a full broadband connection, you can then add more content, more bandwidth-rich, bandwidth-heavy content. And finally, there's this idea of having finger-sized controls. It's very tempting when you're designing websites to put little buttons all over the place. But with those little buttons, when you're using a finger on a screen, you can't access them easily. So I'm going to show you some examples in just a minute. Have we got any questions coming in, Faye?
Hi, Mark. No questions at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. So I'm going to show you that shape up example, and I'll show you how it looks on desktop, and I'll show you how it looks on a mobile device. Then I've got an interactive module, your typical sort of e-learning type module, which I'll show you, and then more of a website approach. And this is just one that's used in a sort of higher education, further education context. It could be any website. So if you just give me a moment to get set up, okay, because I'm going to be sharing this from my mobile device itself. So I'm using a screen mirroring app, which I have to connect to my laptop. And there we go. Right. So change my screen. There we go. So this is the Shape Up book that I showed you earlier. So remember on the picture, the illustration I showed you, you just saw introduction at the top, then the text, then growing pains. You didn't see this whole menu on the left. That's what I mean about it being responsive. When the screen shrinks, you cut out this stuff that you don't need. So let me show you what that looks like on a mobile device. Here we go. Right. So this is on the mobile device, and it's exactly the same content. Let me find the introduction page. Introduction. There we go. And compare that to the main one. So you can see how the screen has changed as you go to the different size device. And the menu now appears when you click on the menu button, and it pops into the main screen. So they've tried to keep it as simple as possible. Now, this book is also available as a PDF. Let me show you that. There we go. This is the PDF version shown on my mobile device. And one of the things I say many times is, if you're going to be delivering to mobile devices, do not do it as a PDF, because how on earth is anyone expected to read that? I can't. And yeah, so the only way you can read that is to pinch and zoom, and then you forever scrolling sideways, and it's probably making you feel ill just trying to watch me do this. It certainly makes me feel ill trying to read it. So key lesson, do not use a PDF if you're delivering to a mobile device. I should come back here again. I'll show you this. I did change this PDF into an ebook version, just use a PDF to ebook converter, which is a bit rough and ready, but straight away, this is in my ebook reader. It's much easier to read. It's lost all the headings and things, but that's fine. At least I've got the basic text, and it's at a size that I can access. So when you're delivering for mobile devices and you've got lots of text, you might want to consider an ebook, EPUB format, or put it into a responsive website, but don't do it as a PDF. So I now want to show you this storyline one. Now, this is a piece of storyline content. Storyline is a piece of software that many e-learning designers use for creating content, and it works well. It works very well on desktop devices. It does not work well on mobile devices. So let me show you what happens. Now, I'm going to show you a quick tip. If you want to see what this is going to look like on a mobile device, I'm using Chrome. You can do the same in Firefox, and I think you can do the same in Edge as well, because that's now based on Chrome. So I right-clicked on the page and go to Inspect. And I've already got this set up so that it's got the device toolbar often when the inspect thing pops up at the bottom, that's not switched on. So you then go to this button down the bottom left, toggle device toolbar, and I've got it set to show what it looks like on a Moto G4 phone. If I could change the type of phone if I want, it just changes the sizes. If I want to tweak it a little bit and see what it looks like on different sizes, I can set it to responsive, and then I can pull it in and pull it out. Now, if I go to a typical phone size, we'll go back to that Moto G4, how is anyone going to read that content? Now, that's the big problem with Articulate Storyline and many of the other slide-based content development tools. They're not responsive. They don't behave in a responsive way. All they do is they just shrink the content, which means you can't read it when it's delivered on a mobile device. So be very careful with the choice of tool when you're creating this sort of interactive e-learning content. Now, Articulate also do a tool called Rise, which, no, not that one. Here we go, this one. So this is one of their Rise examples. And so they built a lesson, and very different to one of the slide-based tools, because you can scroll. And when you're on a mobile device, you're used to scrolling. It used to be that in e-learning, you did not scroll. Everything had to fit on the screen. Now, that's not the case anymore. Scrolling is not bad. In fact, it's actually quite good. And in this one, it's got some interactivity built in. It's got lots of content, and then I can move on to the next lesson. Now, let's see what happens when I change the size of the screen. There we go. And immediately the screen changes around. It's this responsive design. I've got a menu button up the top here that pops the menu in, and I can go back to that previous page if I wanted to, and then I can scroll down, and everything is nicely ordered down the page. Now, there are lots of tools these days that do this sort of thing, and I'll talk about some of those in a moment. And finally, I wanted to show you the course type page. So this is basically it's a website that's been built this is using a content management system called Grav. There are many content management systems. You've probably heard of WordPress or Drupal. They can all do this as long as someone builds a responsive theme. So this is using a Grav theme called Learn2. And you'll see when I change the size of the screen, here we go, and the menu disappears. That's not now available at the top. All the stuff that was at the side of the screen is now pushed down to the bottom. So when you're designing websites or content, think how are you going to make it responsive? That's the key message from this. So I just want to go back to my slides. Here we go. So I've already talked about this, really, about the things to avoid, but it's basically anything that's going to be too small for people to touch or to read and requires sideways scrolling or zooming, like that PDF that I showed. And you can see this on many of the older websites. Newer ones tend to be responsive, but older websites or in countries where they haven't really caught on to the sort of mobile design yet, you'll see that the websites are just often too small to work on mobile devices. And it's actually not hard to build a mobile responsive website, but you've got to think about it from the start. It's very hard to make it responsive after you've built the website. So the things to avoid. PDFs I've already talked about. Unless they're really big text or big pictures, just don't use them. Infographics are the same because they're generally very tightly packed bits of information, and you can only read them if you're zooming in and then scrolling around sideways, up and down. Slide-based authoring tools I mentioned, because they're designed to work on a desktop or laptop size screen, and they do not shrink well to mobile devices. And similarly, detailed videos that are showing how to change a gear cable, things like that, where the video producer can zoom in on something and show you the detail, is great. If you're trying to show someone how to use some software and you only show them your laptop screen, then that's not going to work well on a mobile device. You can use tools that will automatically zoom into the thing that you're showing on that piece of software. And I think Camtasia is one of the ones that does that. And that's great, because then you're highlighting that piece and it's visible to the people that are viewing it on a mobile screen. But if you're trying to show them the software on show you the full desktop experience of the software on a mobile device, it just doesn't work because you can't see the detail. So I want to talk about some tools that can help you, and I'll start with LibreOffice. This is it's a free Office suite. Also, there's a version of it called OpenOffice as well. I use the LibreOffice version of it, and this does all your word processing, spreadsheets, and things like that. But the LibreOffice Word equivalent is a fantastic tool because it produces very clean documents, very nicely structured documents with all the visual hierarchy that I mentioned earlier, and it's also got plugins where you can very easily create an EPUB document from it, which it works brilliantly on a mobile device. Now, if you're on an Apple Mac, then you have Pages, which does exactly the same thing, and that's got EPUB exports built into it. And you've got to be careful though, because EPUB that works on Apple Books doesn't always work as nicely on other EPUB readers. But LibreOffice is a great tool to start with for when you're creating content. You might want to explore the tools that are available within your learning platform. So if you're using Canvas or Moodle or what's the other one? There are many others. There's one I was introduced to a few weeks ago, Learn Tools, I think it's called. But many of them have content authoring tools built into them, and they're built in with they're designed to produce that content in responsive ways. Sorry, excuse me. I'm just going to switch off my notifications on it so it stops beeping. Give me a tick. Okay. Right, we'll try that. And then you might want to use a generic content management system like WordPress, like Grav, like Drupal. There are many content management systems. If your organization has a content management system that your learners can access, then think about building your content within that, because hopefully the person that's installed the content management system will have set up a theme that is mobile responsive. If they haven't, then you need to get someone else to put your content management systems in. If you're using SharePoint and your learners will have access to that SharePoint site, then that's another great tool for creating responsive content. It just works out of the box. It's very, very good. And then finally, you've got your specialist learning content tools. Now, I've put a list of a few here. There are many more than this, but these are some examples, and they go from the least expensive at the top to the most expensive at the bottom. And I just want to give a very brief rundown of the different types of learning tools we've got here. So Adapt Learning is an open source project that is supported by Kineo and Learning Pool and another organization. So it's well supported, and it produces very good, simple, responsive, mobile responsive content. And so you design in their authoring tool, and it makes the content work in both mobile versions and desktop versions automatically. So it's open source, so you can download it and install it yourself. if you want them to support it and host it for you, then they'll charge you a fee. Evolve Authoring is based on Adapt, but they took it and they've expanded on it and made it into a commercial product, and it's owned by a company called Berthelemy now. It's a very, very powerful system, slightly more complex to use than the original Adapt version, because they've added so many extra bells and whistles. But you can create branching scenarios, you can include all sorts of different types of interactions in your content. Gomo Learning is very similar to Evolve, and it's produced by Leo Learning, who are part of the Learning Technologies group. It's another responsive authoring tool, and it's very sophisticated. It works well. There's nothing I wouldn't recommend about it. And then you've got the Articulate 360 suite, and within that suite you've got the Rise product, which you saw an example of that earlier, produces very nice responsive content. And then we start getting into the really, Articulate's expensive, but then you get Domino and Lucid. They're at the next layer up of being expensive. Both of those are very sophisticated. They can produce both desktop, slide-based, and responsive content. They have a lot of capabilities for you programming your content, so you can include variables and all sorts of clever stuff, like you would do in the Articulate storyline system, but you can do it within responsive content as well. And then finally, Xyleme is a learning content management system, which is if you're producing lots and lots of content that you need in multiple formats for multiple types of user. So that, let's say, I put Xyleme into Tetra Pak a few years back, and they produce a lot of technical training documentation, and they needed trainer manuals, they needed student manuals, they needed it in mobile learning format, they needed it to work in an app, they needed it as PDFs. And with Xyleme, you create it once, and then it uses templates and filters to be able to say, right, this bit goes into a trainer manual, that bit goes into a student manual, and this is how it needs to look as a PDF, this is how it needs to look in mobile responsive format, but all from a single source. That's its main USP, but it is very expensive. So that gives you an idea of the type of range of products out there. These are all designed specifically for the learning context. If you're happy not to need, if you don't need SCORM-based learning content, then there are heaps more tools. That's when we start going back into the content management systems and generic publishing tools, that you don't necessarily need a specific learning authoring tool. Have we got any questions, Faye?
Hi, Mark. No questions at the moment.
Okay, right. And then just finally, one of the big questions that people do have is, how do we take our existing content and make it mobile? And the first part of that process is you need to test your existing content and see, does it, how well does it work on a mobile device? And you can do that in your browser, like I showed you earlier. You could try it out on your mobile phones, see what it looks like, how it works. If it doesn't work, then you've got a big project ahead of you. There is no simple way to take existing content and make it mobile. You need to go back to basics. So the first part of that is rethink the learning design. And the box on the right there is showing you, reminding you those key use cases for mobile learning. So think, does our content work within any of those use cases? So for example, if your learning design is about it's a complex game-based scenario where you're showing people how to use software, and it's very small, very detailed, then it probably is not going to work so well on a mobile device. So you might want to rethink the whole learning design approach. But if your content is mostly reference materials, or mostly how-to stuff, or you've got that, you want to include that spaced repetition concept, then okay, that's probably going to work well within a mobile context. So you focus on what mobile is good for, those things on the right. But then you will need to rebuild it. Like I said, there is no easy way to take existing content and make it work on a mobile device. If your content is in a raw format, let's say like a Word document or a LibreOffice document, and then you can start with that and then build from it. That's the best. That's the best case scenario. But if your content is built in Storyline, or it's built in another e-learning authoring tool or a web tool that has created that desktop friendly content, you're going to need to start again, and you're going to need to go back to basics with a new tool and put the content in, probably even copying and pasting from the old tool. And unfortunately, Storyline doesn't allow you to copy and paste very easily. So it's really back to basics if that's your starting point. Sorry, I'm a bit negative about Storyline, and that's not singling them out because they're any worse than any other tool. It's just because they're one of the most popular tools. It's people think Storyline is going to be the answer to their problems, but it isn't if you want a mobile friendly program. So that's really where I want to leave it. If you've got any questions now, please raise them, and I welcome any comments, any thoughts that you might have. And Faye, we'll give people a couple of minutes, and then if you can pass them over to me, that'd be great, or pass them as they come in.
Hi Mark, yeah, that's great. I'll actually hand over to Manjinder for this section of the webinar. So Manjinder, would you be able to help out with the Q&A session?
Yes, of course. So there's just a few questions being sent in, which are all to do with whether the slides are going to be sent out to the audience. There will be a recording and the slides will be sent out, and the recording will be made available to you as well. If there are any other questions for Mark, I would appreciate if you could get them into the question box now. I think that was really interesting there, Mark. And I think a lot of the points that you touched on, we take for granted, I think, using mobile phones a lot of the time. And I definitely use a mobile phone for, especially YouTube. It's my go-to to find out how to do pretty much everything around the house. There's nothing else coming through at the moment, Mark. So firstly, I'd really like to thank Mark for his contribution and such a wonderful presentation. There's a comment from Sally saying it's really interesting and very, very useful, Mark. So that's from Sally Betts. Righty-ho. Okay, if there are no other questions, I am going to wrap up. Thank you everybody for your time and for attending the webinar today. I would like to just inform you about our next webinar, which is on the 29th of July at 2:30 till 3:30, and that one is on how to keep learners engaged and progressing in a mixed delivery model. So it's all about how to use blended learning and make the most of digital interactions and face-to-face delivery as well. So that one's going to be an amazing one as well. Really look forward to seeing you there. If you want to register to that, please do go to our resources page and register on that. and also do sign up for our newsletter, and you can see the contact page will allow you to do that. So thank you everybody for your time. Thank you, Faye, for your hard work in the background, and Mark for the presentation. It's really interesting, and thank you audience for listening. See you all next week, hopefully. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.